second event out of 7 for our digital launch of the Makers Club Game On. And this workshop is titled Let's Frame It Another Way, From Prose to Comics. The Makers Club Game On is the first book in our new graphic novel series. It aims to inspire kids to explore STEAM topics and maker culture. It features a group of fun and diverse characters who embark on creative journeys to experiment, code, and develop a maker mindset. So today we have with us the illustrator of the graphic novel, Tintin Pantoja. She is calling in away from Manila. So a little bit about Tintin. Tintin Pantoja is a Philippine-born artist who graduated with a BFA in cartooning and illustration from the School of Visual Arts in New York. Among her works are adaptations of Hamlet, Pride and Prejudice, and the educational middle grade manga math series. So most recently, she's just published a comic, Unplugged and Unpopular, with writer Matt Haggerty. Today, she's here to share with us how we can combine images and text to develop a comic, and also show us a live sketching session, along with exercises that you guys can follow along. So that's a lot of exciting things, and I'll leave it for Tintin to take over from here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Hello. I'm Tintin, and I'm the artist. I'm illustrating Raymina's script for the Makers Club. So I'll talk a little bit about how we got together and made the book. I'll talk about the steps that we took, mostly from the illustration side, and then we'll do a little drawing demo. And then if you have any questions, or if you'd like to draw alongside us and maybe make some characters or practice what I'm drawing, copy from the screen, or maybe even make a comic during that section, then go ahead, please start drawing, take out your materials and just have fun. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and talk a bit about the book, and then I'm going to show samples from the book. So let me share the screen now. I'm very low tech, so this is going to be a very basic slideshow. Okay, is it clear for everyone? Everyone, the screen is clear? Okay, all right. So these are the main characters of the Makers Club. And the book is about Nadia and Priya, who are 2 students at Pangolin Secondary School. And they're 2 girls with 2 very different personalities. And they have to join forces somehow to win and earn a great grade at the school science fair. And that's the basic plot. And Nadia, who is the girl with the glasses and the pony, well, they both have ponytails, but she's the girl with a purple shirt. And she's more of an artist. She's the dreamy type, and she needs good grades. She feels pressured to get good grades. So she feels like she really needs to win this science fair. And Priya, who's the taller girl, who's holding the computer. I hope you can see it with the windows and everything.
Can I let you to maybe make that slide a bit bigger? Like you're currently sharing the folder look.
I am folding. I'm not showing the slideshow.
It's okay.
Oh, okay. Because in my screen it's a slideshow.
Okay, give it a try.
Okay. Let me know if I need to adjust the screen.
Sure.
Okay. But Priya is the taller girl, and she's more of the science gaming whiz. And they have very different personalities. She's more moody and all that. And the trick is how they get together and win or not win. I won't spoil the book. So we'll go into the book cover. Oh, now I see what you're talking about. Okay, is that clearer? We don't see the folder anymore? Okay.
You're still seeing the folder, I'm sorry.
Still seeing the folder, my goodness.
Okay. Maybe, do you want me to take over? Like I can.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so let me know whenever you unshare your screen and then I can share mine.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, think that's better.
Okay.
Around
All
7
right.
screen.
So this is the cover of the book, The Makers Club, yeah? And so a little bit about the cover. It shows the main characters. It's a little bit about the plot. We didn't want to spoil too much about the plot, but spoiler alert, it's about gaming and coding. So we had to include a few of those elements in the cover. And of course, the main characters. So the tone of the book is supposed to be very nice. It's fun, but also introducing the whole world of STEAM and science and coding in a fun and digestible way. So let's go to the next slide and talk about the characters who we're going to meet. This one. Our main character is Nadia, and she's a new student at Pangolin. And like I said, she's more the artistic type, and she is dreamy. She likes making zines. Let's go on to the next slide because that shows some of her hobbies. And she's into this book series called Banyan High. Over here, we see the posters behind her. And the big thing about her is that she's an artist and she thinks artistically. She's more the artistic and creative side of the team. Let's go to the next slide to Priya. Priya is more of a tech computer science person. So she's more inclined for technology, and she's the one who learns and teaches Nadia how to use the computer and how they basically conceptualize this project, which involves coding. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but this project that involves coding for the science fair. And she loves gaming also. She's a huge gamer, and that's a big part of the story. Okay, let's go to the next slide. How I drew the comic. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about how I drew the comic from Remina's script to the final picture. What's the next slide? Okay, Remina's script. So this is the script that Remina handed to me, and I took the first page to show to you guys. I can read it out loud if anybody, so you don't have to read it. But this is the format of the script that Remina gave, and each writer has their own format. But this is hers, and this is page 1. So I'll read it out loud.
Yep.
The bell rings. The first years are making their way into assembly at their new school. Nadia is in the middle of the first panel, following the others. They are all dressed casually for orientation. She's in a plain t-shirt and jeans with old sneakers, with hair tied up or down. If hair is down, note, it's thick and bushy. Narration, Nadia captioned, which means that this is what Nadia is thinking. So it's actually a text box and not dialogue. So Nadia says in panel 1, orientation day. And then back to the instructions. In the hall, the students are listening to the principal's speech. Panel 2, Nadia narrates again. I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe it. I'm here. And then the next instruction, we see Nadia now sitting as if she's listening intently, but she's actually daydreaming. She hugs her zipped open school bag to her chest. A book peeks out of it. Panel 3, narration. Again, Nadia's thinking to herself. It's my first day of secondary school. I wonder if it's really like what the books and TV say. Now, the principal is still talking during the presentation and presenting generic slides about making the best of your years in secondary school. In the bag beside her is a worn-out copy of Banyan High. Her arm obscures the title of the book, so only the front cover art with the main characters Ponti, the Pontianak vampire girl, and Hans, the pretty emo ghost boy, is shown. Panel 4, narration, Nadia thinks again. Man, I hope I make friends here. Panel 5, dialogue 5. It'd really stink if I didn't. Nadia makes a concerned, anxious face with expressive sweat drops. She is nervous about how school will turn out for her. So if you got that, it basically explains, it describes Nadia's first day of school, her thoughts, and breaks it down into dialogue. The numbers refer to balloons. Each dialogue happens appears as a balloon or a caption, and I'll explain that later on. So from that script, Raymina makes what we call a thumbnail, and this is what's going on in this slide. She draws out the story as she sees it in her head, as she wants to tell it. So in the first panel, ring, the bells come in, and then she goes into the auditorium, the principal speaks. It basically describes what's going on in the script. But now we see the page composition, the panel compositions, and where the dialogue and panels will go. So this is also the stage at which we see the expressions of the characters and the first character designs and what they're doing. So this is Raymina's version. Let's go to the next page because it's interesting here. Raymina works digitally, I know, and I also work digitally. And here's my work setup, and I apologize because it's a little messy. But now I take the script and I take Raymina's thumbnails, and then I set up my workstation as pictured here. And then let's go to the next slide. And then I do my own version of the thumbnail in this case, and turn it into a rough pencil. Now, Raymina did the thumbnails, and I'm doing the pencil modeled after her thumbnails. And in some cases, I try to follow her thumbnails as closely as possible. And in some cases, I changed a few things, like the angles and all that. But the rough pencils, this stage, is basically the first stage of my pencils, by which I mean I draw on the actual page that's going to become a comic. And you'll notice it's in blue because I think better in blue. And at this stage, I'm figuring out the angles, where the characters are looking at, the placement of the balloons, if Raymina hadn't indicated that already, the composition, basically what the camera angles are going to be. Let's go on to the next slide for the more finished pencils. So this is the second step of the next pencils, where I draw on top of the rough pencils. So we have the rough pencils, and then we have the finished pencils. The finished pencils are in black. And that's where I start to go into detail, start to figure out the background, the characters, the expressions, and what they look like. Even the background characters have to look different from the main characters. So after that, after we have the rough pencils, and then the finished pencils, I clean that up and make inks. Now they're called inks because traditionally when people make comics by hand, they ink. They use ink like paintbrushes and G-nibs and pens to actually draw this stage. And the reason why you ink on top of pencils is because it's easier to print out inks because the lines are much darker and the lines are thicker. So if you're photocopying, say, or printing out a comic, it's much clearer and crisper to use inks than to print out the pencil. So these are the inks, and at this stage, it differs for each artist, but at this stage, I'm still finalizing things, straightening out lines, putting in final details. And finally, when that's done, I submit it to the editors for approval. And then we go on to the next stage, which is the next slide. And it goes back to Raymina for colors. And in this case, she did the colors. She chose the colors. She chose the palette, which means the kind of overall color selection. So she does that digitally also. But if you're doing a comic traditionally, you can use paint, color pencils, anything. So, but in this case, we're working on the computer, both of us. So Raymina does the colors, and then we have a letterer for the next slide. Finally, we add letters. All that dialogue that you saw earlier in the captions, this is the stage where we add it in using a program called Adobe Illustrator, sorry, Adobe Illustrator. So now we have complete the panels, the drawings, the captions, and it all comes together. And this is the stage where you can finally print the comic. So that's a breakdown of how we did the comic. I'm going to talk a little bit about how my drawing process for the kids here, for the budding artists here. And if you want to follow along, you can. It's basically I'm going to follow the basic same steps that I used to make the comics, right? We're going to draw rough and then finish the pencils and then go on to inks. But here's a step-by-step process. We'll start with how I draw the main character, Nadia, and her head. Oh, her figure, sorry. Let's start with her figure first, her head later, her face later. So I start with, in the first panel or the first part, which is on the left side of the paper, of the screen. I always start drawing a character's head. And it's just the first thing I think of when I think of a character. It's their head, their face, their expression. And then in the middle part, I kind of build up their body. So I add a line for the spine right in the middle, and roughly where the shoulders and the pelvis are going to appear. And that tells me a little bit about the character's pose. And then in the third part, I make a stick figure. And, you know, never say that stick figures aren't real drawings. You know, when people say, oh, I can only draw stick figures, I can't draw. Stick figures are real drawings. They're the basis of all like finalized figures. So again, I'm building up the stick figure slowly, slowly. Now there are shoulders and a proper pelvis and feet, as you can see in the third drawing. I also, if you see the lines along the body, those are the heads. And what I mean is, each of those lines, Sophia, can you point to the notches on the side of the, the same slide. Yes, the lines, the horizontal lines. Yeah, those that divide the main figure. Those are lines of proportion. Now, each of those lines is a measurement of the character's head. And I figure out the character's proportion by figuring out how many heads tall they are. And in this case, Nadia is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5 heads. And the number of heads changes if the character is older, younger, or if they look thinner or bulkier. You can really change how the character looks by changing the number of heads in their proportion. I can explain later if you want to know more about that. But let's go on to the next slide. So now we continue building up the figure. We add shoulders. I always rely on basic shapes. You see there's a rectangle or a trapezoid or some sort for the torso. And then the pelvis is just a curve. Usually some people draw it as a cone. And then lines. I think of the legs and the arms as, well, here they're lines, but I think of them as cylinders, kind of like sausages. If you know what cylinders are, they're long, round tubes. And basically that's the shape of the arm and the leg. So I'm building up the figure. Some people draw the figure like really easily. They can draw from top to bottom. The top is beautifully rendered and finished, and then they start drawing the chest and the pelvis and the legs slowly going down. But I like to draw the entire figure all and build it up in stages. And this is because it really helps me to think about the proportions and the overall design of the character when I see the whole character all at once. I'm also starting to build in the middle part of this slide, the character's position or pose. So finally we isolate, we have a rough body, which on the rightmost side of the slide in red. So I've built up the body, I've built up the proportions at that stage. I have guidelines for the eyes and the nose And we can go over to the next slide. Finally, I start my rough pencils. So it's a long process. These are the rough pencils. Those previous lines were just the guidelines. So again, I add more, I build up more and more details slowly. I take the rough pencils and finally I do final pencils on top of them. And you'll notice they're red and then blue. I tend to switch between colors a lot just because it helps me think and separate in my mind the layers of drawings. You don't have to go through all these stages, but for me, this is how I draw. It's different for every artist. Let's go on to the next slide as I continue adding detail. These are my finished pencils. If you remember, we had finished pencils in the comic. These are my finished pencils. And then in the center, I ink the drawing. So the finished pencils are on the left side, and then I ink the drawing in the middle with a different brush, a different digital brush. And this is where I add the details like the design on her shirt, the inks, fill in the blacks of her hair, add in the toes, the fingers, and finally on the rightmost side, oh no, back, I in the color, and it's all digital. But again, if you like watercolor pencil, if you're drawing along, feel free to use anything you want. It's all different for each artist. Let's go on to the next. It's more of the same basically, and I'm going to demonstrate this live later on, but this is how I draw the head. And a bit more detail. The head is, and the first part, the head is definitely round. So I start with a circle. And you'll see later on why I always start with the circle of the head. It's not really a circle, it's a globe, a sphere. Because if you see, our heads are round, right? So when you start drawing the figure, you always start with the simple shape of the head. And then in the second part, the same slide, the second part, I start to add guidelines. You'll see here the guidelines separating the head, the two halves of the face, because that's going to be my face. And I add a line for the nose, I add a line for the eyes, and maybe the mouth and the bottom of the nose. So again, I'm slowly building up the figure. Let's go to the next slide. And here's where we actually start to see the face. Once I have my guidelines, I can slowly add in the eyes, the mouth, and the nose, and the ears. So I have to know where those guidelines are in order to properly place the features of the face. Oh, that rhymes, I like that. So let's go to the next slide. I have my rough face, and now I can do my finished pencils on it, which has Nadia's features. So it starts, this is the point where it really starts to look like Nadia or whichever character you're looking at. Because now we add the hair, the expression is much clearer, and basically this is where the character, for me, the drawing really starts to come to life, where you add the little details that make the character who or what she or he is. In which case, the hair, the eyes, the smile. And before then, it's all just guidelines. So let's go on to the next. Finally, I clean up the drawing, and I have to emphasize that you need to draw the guidelines very lightly when you're drawing. In this case, since I'm drawing digitally, I can always erase the guidelines. I can always erase the guidelines digitally. I can remove them as a layer. But if you're drawing by hand, draw the guidelines and the rough pencils very, very lightly so that you can erase them for this stage. And at this point, next slide, I finish up the drawing with inks using a different digital brush and fill in the details. And finally, it's Nadia. Nadia's done. So that's how I construct the figure. So now that we know how the basic steps of making a comic, of how I draw and make the comic, let's look at how I make an actual comic. which I prepared for you in the next slide. I made a sample comic here, and let's read it first so we have an idea of what we're getting into. So steps to making a sample comic. The first step, this slide, is where we brainstorm. And that's where I have, that's where I develop an idea. I think we're jumping slides a bit. Let's go to the next slide so that we can read the actual comic. Okay, actual comic. Nadia and Priya at school. Theoretically, Nadia, I'm hungry. I forgot my lunch money. That happens to me all the time. Priya, being a friend, says, you know, want half of my sandwich, you know, because she's nice. So she's offering her sandwich, and Nadia at the next slide, the next panel, yummy, thanks Priya. And the sandwich is supposed to look appetizing. So she takes a big bite, and finally, surprise! The sandwich is extremely spicy. Now, I hope you don't think her mouth is literally on fire. It just feels like it's on fire. And that's the magic of comics, where you can try to express ideas visually, even though they're not literal. But anyway, we'll go into that further. Anyway, the sandwich is really spicy, and Nadia goes, whoa, what's in this sandwich? And the punchline, Priya apparently likes really spicy food. Chili, garlic, pepper, wasabi. So I think Nadia is going to think twice next time about getting any of Priya's food. And that's the punchline. And that's my quick comic. I hope you like it. I hope it's funny somehow, or it teaches you something, like not to get your friend's food or to never forget your lunch. But yes, yay, comic. Okay, let's talk about how I made this comic so you can make your own. If we go back to let's go back to the previous slide, the brainstorming slide. And the first step to making a comic is to have a good idea of what your story is going to be. In this case, how I came up with the idea is I knew I wanted to do a short comic about Nadia and Priya. So I already had my characters. So I wanted them to interact and have something funny happen between them. So what else? I was brainstorming, trying to come up with ideas. And then I was hungry. And what came to my mind was a sandwich, because everybody loves sandwiches and everybody brings sandwiches to school. Everybody knows what a sandwich is. So that's where my story came from. That's where my story started to fall into place. Nadia and Priya sharing a sandwich. Well, what funny thing can happen from that? Well, what if the sandwich was weird? You know? So this is where ideas come from. You think of elements, you think of characters first, and then you think what could happen between them. And then you think, well, what's the twist? In this case, Nadia and Priya, Nadia forgets her sandwich, Nadia and Priya share a sandwich, but twist, the sandwich is really incredibly spicy. So there has to be a twist in your story somehow, something to make it interesting and to make it unexpected, to surprise your reader. So let's go back to the actual drawing of the comic. So this slide. Okay, so once I had the idea for the comic, this is when I started to write it down as a thumbnail. You saw Raymina a while ago make a script in prose, in text. But in this case, I made the script, I handwrote it. At the same time, I was drawing it out. And this is where the comic starts to make shape. It's very different for every creator, how they make comics. Some creators write it out, some creators type it out, some creators just do one panel at a time. In this case, I think in pictures as well as words at the same time. And I think Raymina does too. Well, we can find out later. But so in the first panel, we see the dialogue forming alongside the pictures. I forgot my lunch money. I'm so hungry. So Priya offers, here, have a piece of my sandwich. Again, thank you, says Nadia. And then the fourth panel down below, ah, she screams. And then finally, what flavor is your sandwich? And then finally, the punchline, chili jalapeno pepper, my favorite. You'll notice that the dialogue is not quite the same as in the finished comic because I was still editing the dialogue in my head. So what happens in the thumbnails is not, what happens in the thumbnails is not quite the final version, okay? So the thumbnails is getting the rough idea for your comic. So now I start drawing in the comic for the next slide. And this basically follows the same steps as I drew the figure. So I draw in this case, the pencils, the rough pencils, using a pencil brush in my program, which is Clip Studio. And I put in the dialogue at this stage. I write it down. And the reason for that, some people only put the dialogue afterwards, but I always put the dialogue at the pencil stage or make sure the dialogue appears there, is because I want the dialogue to fit. If you're drawing a comic in a panel sometimes and you put all this detail and you don't put the dialogue or the words already there, sometimes you'll find out that when it's time to put the dialogue in, there's not enough space. Whoops. So comics are a combination of words and pictures. They have to balance each other out. So sometimes you'll really need the dialogue in. You can't leave it out. So if you have the pictures, but you don't have space for the dialogue, then the story won't feel complete, right? Because the comic needs both of them. So anyway, I add the dialogue at the pencil stage, and then next slide, I make, okay, that's the next panel. So I broke down 2 panels. Again, this has the sound effect. Okay, yeah, next slide, sorry. And then finally the inks. For this was just a sample comic, a very quick one. I wasn't planning to print it out. So I went directly into inks / final pencils. Pen sinks, can you call that pen sinks? Anyway, so the final drawing comes here in the ink stage. And then the next slide, the next 2 slides actually, I add in the colors or flats. In this stage, professional coloring means you add flat colors. That's why they're called flats. And they're flat. The reason why they're called flats is because the colors are flats. Some colorists later on will add fancy shading and effects and all sorts of details at the coloring stage, like shadows and filters. But in this case, the comic is very simple, so we just keep flats. So next slide, these are how the flats, oh, sorry, back. These are how the flats look. They look kind of funny because the lines, I had to make the inks disappear to show you what the flats look like underneath. And finally, next slide, we combine the flats and the inks. And at this stage, I changed some of the flats. So Nadia's glasses are differently colored, and I added a bit of shadow behind her collar. It's still very rough because this is just a sample. But then after we combine the colors and the lines, we go to the next slide, and finally we add the letters. Back. We finally add the letters. And remember what I said about making sure that there's enough space for the letters to be very clear? This is where it really comes in handy, because you have to be able to read the comic very clearly. And in fact, I think I made a mistake with one of the slides because you can see a bit of the other balloon sticking out. So if I had planned this slide better, we wouldn't see that missing balloon, that bit of the balloon on the side. So this is a warning. Yeah, this is a warning. Not to plan out your balloons beforehand.
That's great, Tintin. Do you want to move to the live demo so that people can continue following you and draw?
Yeah, perfect. I was just about to end. Let me launch the program. No, wait, first I have to share the screen and then launch the program. So tell me if this works. I'm sharing the screen now, and I have squiggles because I was testing out the screen.
Yes, we see the squiggles. Great.
Okay, you see the squiggles. So I'm going to go through my drawing technique. Let's draw the panel where Nadia's mouth is on fire, because that's the funniest panel. And I might vanish from the window for a while because my tablet is on the side. So, oh, here. So I do my guidelines first, and remember, we start with the sphere, or rather the circle, which is a sphere, and then I lay in my guidelines. And the reason why, as I explained, why we have a sphere for the guidelines is because if you look at a skull, and I'm going to draw a skull really, really roughly. Ta-da! Notice that the cranium, the most prominent part of the skull, is round, it's circle. So it's the clearest part of the head. It's the clearest part to draw a head. So then we have the eye sockets and all that. So let's turn that, let's go back to the circle. So now I'm going to build up the circle, the face. I'm going to put my guidelines. I have the cranium. Now I'm going to put the character's jaw. Okay. Then the eyes. This is the big, I find out, I guess I'm making a basic face. The nose, and then the mouth. And here it's on fire, so her mouth is like, she's really screaming. It's a really spicy sandwich. I'm still figuring out the expression at this point. Yeah, still playing around. See, as an artist, I do a lot of exploratory lines, which are rough guidelines, because I think when I draw, it's very different from each artist. How they draw, here's the fire. I've drawn Nadia a lot of times, because when you're drawing a comic, you draw a character, 100 times, maybe 5 times a page. And maybe if you're drawing one book, that's 200 drawings. So I pretty much know how Nadia looks at this point. So I'm just filling in her features. And I'm going pretty fast and pretty basic at that point, because I know what she looks like already. So I make that layer with all the guidelines faint. You can still see it, even though it's blue? Okay. And then finally, like I said, I draw my pencils on top of it, my finished pencils. If you are working with pen and paper and not digitally, what you can do is you can draw with a color pencil on one paper. And then what some artists do is they take a light box and draw on top of the light box so that they can see the guidelines beforehand. Whoops, I got the eyes wrong. Bit of the nose. Pencil looks a little strange, but whoops. So now I'm doing a more finished version of the pencils. Lines emphasizing her shock and the hair. And finally, when these pencils are ready, I can ink them. But that's another stage of, making this lighter. Now I'll remove the guidelines now that I have her basic shape. Is it clear? Is the drawing clear? I have to keep checking. Yeah. So add in details, add in sweat drops, because who doesn't sweat when they eat spicy food, right? And finally, I make this light again. Oops. It really depends on the setting of your program. So color, monochrome. And finally, pencil's too big. So I fiddle around with the settings, my digital settings while I'm drawing. It's best to figure out what settings you like first before you start drawing. But this is for demonstration purposes. So the settings are still changing. Should I go into colors, or colors are a bit harder, so I won't go into colors. I'll stop at the ink stage. And we have our fire-breathing character, Nadia.
Yay!
So that was a really quick demonstration of how I build up a drawing. I'm drawing live, so the character is not as clean, I think, as normal, but you get the idea.
That's great, Tintin. You prefer to draw on the tablet then as opposed to a paper, because then you can do all your exploratory lines without having to like erase them later.
Yes, definitely. It's so much easier and faster. Now, there are some drawbacks with drawing with the tablet and drawing digitally, but it really depends on what you like. If artists want to work fast, a tablet is the way to go, or really clean, or really, some artists really like the personal touch of having, you know, actual inks and brushes. So it really depends on the artist, what they prefer. Yeah, the tools of an artist are very personal.
Right. So right now we are quickly coming to close to the end of our session. So I want to throw it to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Tintin at this point? I can ask Tintin some questions while you guys are thinking about it. You can unmute yourself, raise your hand, or maybe you can type your question in the chat. Do we have a question? Ooh, I hear some noises and bumps. But not It's okay. I'll just continue talking with you for now. So what kind of characters do you like to draw when you are in your own free time? Like, do you have particular types of human figures you like to do? You observe people in a cafe, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I have a very cartoony style. So I like to draw characters that are very lively, who have a lot of big actions and big expressions. Like they're usually smiling widely, or, you know, they're really serious. Not very good at realistic characters, so I like characters who act a lot.
Right.
Have a lot of big actions. Yeah.
I think the question's popping in. So somebody asked, how long does it take for you to finish a comic, and which process takes the most time?
Let's see. It took more than 6 months to finish this comic. But it goes faster the further along you are, because you start to get to know the characters, you start to get to know the process. So it took about 6 to 8 months, I think, to do this one. But the longest time, the longest time was designing the characters and the pencils. The earlier stages are always, for me anyway, they take the longest time, because you're still figuring things out. You're figuring out what the character looks like, how the character acts, what the school looks like, and how everything feels, not to mention your own work process. It speeds up the further along you go.
I see. Okay. So do you take any particular steps to ensure the continuity, like the consistency of your character?
Yes. I draw, here, I can actually show you samples of a previous character. I'll tear it from my back, my wall. But I draw character guides like this. Oh no, it's being hidden by the background. I draw character guides and these are called turnarounds. Oh. So they're drawings of the character in multiple angles. They're multiple angle drawings of the character in several angles and costumes. If I ever forget what the character looks like, and you will, if you're drawing 500 pages or 100 pages of a character, you'll find that the character changes from page 1 to page 100, and you have to keep that look consistent. So it helps to have a guide of what the character looks like from different angles and different postures and different costumes.
Right. I think we have one last question. We have two more questions. One is, what's your favorite character from Makers Club to draw? And the other one is, do your characters appear in your dreams, since you're so familiar with them?
Sorry?
The
last
first
question?
one, the second one is, do your characters appear in your dreams when you sleep?
Well, okay. My favorite character besides Nadia, because she's the easiest, because she's round, and I kind of like drawing her because she's so expressive. Of course, I like Priya. I like them all because they have different characteristics. I have to say that one of the characters in the book, Waikwi,
Yongqiang, yes.
yes, he's in a wheelchair, and that was quite a challenge to draw because I'm not as good, I think, with machinery and keeping that consistent. So I had to have a lot of references. But yeah, that was okay. That's the first question. So that I had some characters are easy. It's not like I like drawing characters, but some characters are easier than others. Second question is, do I see the characters in my dreams? Well, if I'm working too fast, or if I have a project that's due pretty soon, sometimes I will dream that I'm doing it, or I'm late. Like last night when I was preparing for this talk, I kept dreaming that I was already talking.
Right.
So it does happen.
Dream as well yesterday. So we shared the same dream.
Oh yeah. I think when you're nervous, it happens.
Okay, so I think that's all the time that we have. So
I stop sharing.
Thank you, Tintin, for like sharing so much with us about your process, about your drawings. I think we are all inspired to draw more, and it's such a great way to exercise the creative muscle once in a while. So I hope our audience also enjoyed getting a glimpse to see how like artists make comics. So now perhaps we can end this and go to the lucky draw session. So if you do not want to participate in the lucky draw, you can type opt out in the chat and we'll remove you from the list. And the rest of you who are still in there, we're going to like spin the wheel and we're going to get to that later. So while some of you are still deciding whether you want to opt out or not, I'm going to talk a little bit. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. We have more workshops and events planned in the upcoming few Sundays. So every alternate Sunday until September, we're going to have an event. The next event is in 2 weeks' time on the 12th of July. It is the digital launch of the book. So in this digital launch, Ina Narayana and Tintin will share more about the characters, their short stories, and the creative processes, and what Makers Club has meant to them. So if you love what Tintin shared today, like in 2 weeks' time, join us again and you'll find more. To get a copy of the print book, the pre-orders are available now with Closet Full of Books until 30th June, so that's in 2 days' time. It comes with cool bookmarks and freebies too. So as for the kids, always make sure before you register for any of the events or do anything, like go online in general, check with your parents, teachers or guardians. Make sure that it's all good. So anybody, I think everyone who wants to opt out has already opted out. So I can now pass the time over to Josephine. Okay, I think we'll organize ourselves.
All right. Hi. Okay, so I think everybody who wanted to opt out has already opted out. So what I'm going to do is to put the name in a wheel, and we're going to spin the wheel. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, so everyone should be seeing this wheel, and I have some names into the wheel. So I think quite a few participants have opted out of this. So what we're going to do is to spin the wheel, and there will be 3 lucky winners. So that's actually a pretty high chance of winning. Sorry, I don't know what happened. because there's actually a pretty high chance of winning. So what we're going to do is to spin it now. Okay, so
Drum rolls.
okay, so Isabel Ho, congratulations. So you'll be winning a $10 voucher from Closet Full of Books, and we'll be contacting you after the session ends. Okay, so I'm going to remove her name from this. And what I'm going to do now is to spin again. Sofara. Okay, and that is it. Okay, so that is Sofara. Congratulations, Sofara. We'll be contacting you as well. And now I'm going to remove it. And now we have 4 people left in the lucky draw. So I'm going to spin this again one last time.
Those are good chances.
Whoa.
Whoa, that's very close. So congratulations to Christine. And congratulations to all the winners. So we'll be contacting you after the session with the email that you registered with. And that's the end of the lucky draw.
Right, so thank you once again for Tintin and for everyone for being with us today. The DE team would like to thank everyone who took time on a Sunday to join us for this workshop. We hope to see you again for future events. Goodbye and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Hey, your video is not around.
Bye.
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 Oh. Oh, what a cutie. Oh. Right.
I document.
All right, I'm going to end the meeting for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Bye. Nice to see you, Remina.